Jon woke again to the same dream, the suffocation, the escape, and the same three shrieking faces. Brunette, blonde and silver hair flowed in the breeze and burned into his memory. He woke amidst the long, flowing red hair of his perturbed wife. His groggy eyes shifted over to her, but the strain he put on his neck was enough to make him wince. The sting of his past transgressions was enough to bring his conscious mind to the present, and the three faces faded into his memory.
It hurts, doesn't it? You're lucky to be alive, husband.
Jon again winced as she checked his wound. She obviously was aggravated with him and disregarded any sense of a gentle touch.
Arya, where is Arya?
Jon demanded, and Munda's hands lowered from his wound. Suddenly all frustration had seemed to leave her.
How long have I been asleep?
Only an hour, maybe 2. Jon and Eddard secured the builder and have been searching the castle for Lady Arya.
Jon again groaned as he attempted to rise from his bed. His cloak and shirt had been removed as Munda was attempting to sew the deep wound at the base of his neck. He sat up and his feet hit the floor. Munda pleaded with him to rest, but Jon refused to be deterred. His weary eyes lifted to his frustrated, albeit concerned wife as he spoke softly to her.
Call for Eddard. Arya is atop the wall. I'll need his assistance. Please ask Lord Tarly to assist us in raising the lift to the top of the wall.
Jon rose to his feet reluctantly. His body was weary from his recent blood loss. The room spun around his head as he struggled for his cloak. Munda stopped his search and held him in place as she helped his arms through his blouse and cloak. It was only then Jon noticed the red streaks down the face of his beautiful wife. It was his blood, Jon thought. Only then did Jon realize he was fortunate to be alive. The considerable stress placed upon his expecting wife was more than he was comfortable with. It was then Jon decided to commit fully to her, rather than his other numerous responsibilities. Jon replayed his own failures in his own mind. His hubris as Lord Commander, granting clemency to the free folk. His failings during the battle for the Dawn, and finally his own fatherhood. Numerous summers spent beyond the wall in search of Daenerys, all the while he should have been raising his own son. Eddard was the only remnant of the Dragon Queen remaining in this world, apart from Rhaegal, Jon surmised. At this thought, Jon heard the roar of his past life. It was clear, subtle, but deafening. Jon had assumed Rhaegal had finally made his attempt to rekindle their broken trust. At this thought, Jon hurried to ready himself, as his wife assisted him. Jon withheld a wince as Munda directed his sword hand into his cloak. The minutes he spent upright nearly drained him of all his remaining energy. He utilized his left hand to embrace his wife as he attempted to emerge from the apartment back into the familiar courtyard of Castle Black. Visible, sporadic applause was heard from the unlikeliest of sources. Jon noted the various faces of his son Eddard, his captain of the guard, Lord Jon Tarly, in addition to numerous Dothraki screamers, all pledged to his son. Jon looked to the skies to see the beast flying high and eastward. Jon wasn't sure if the dragon was indeed the beast he was bonded to so many years ago. His scales seemed pale, almost translucent. Jon reached out to him in his mind, but the fire-breather paid him no attention as he sprinted east. Jon then carefully made his way down the stairs, followed closely by Lady Munda. There he met Eddard, who greeted him enthusiastically. The solemn look upon Jon's face communicated this was no time for celebration.
We thought we lost you.
Eddard exclaimed, and Jon swallowed his emotion whole. He carefully chose his next words to his son.
It's not the first time I would have died in this courtyard, son. I consider myself fortunate I have blood I can rely upon.
Jon finished to Eddard's grin. Jon looked around at nearly 4 dozen Dothraki riders, all mounted and seemingly awaiting instructions.
Omara rode to the Wolfswood and collected all those who would defend us. Our family, I mean.
Nearly 2 decades since your mother's departure, and there are still those who would ride to defend her blood.
Jon complimented his son's mother to Eddard's surprise. His son looked to him for instructions, and Jon was quick to oblige.
Would you escort me topside, son? I dare say this day may not be done with us as of yet.
He suggested, and Lord Eddard sprang into action. Ned immediately ordered a pair of riders to man the capstan and Lord Tarly to his side. Omara stood at Eddard's flank awaiting instructions. Jon couldn't help but think of Daenerys as the courtyard of people from various backgrounds, all waited on Eddard's every word. He had commanded the respect and admiration of those around him without effort or consequence, just as his mother did, Jon thought. Lady Munda had decided to remain below as the Lord Commander. Lord Eddard and Jon Tarly entered the lift. Jon Tarly slammed the gate closed before reporting to Sir Jon.
The watchman, Builder Rose. He is unharmed and in our custody, Lord Commander.
Jon acknowledged the report as the lift creaked and moaned. The trio of men rose into the clouds and Jon apprised the men of why they were ascending to the top of the wall. Jon rested against the bulkhead. The moment had just seemed too much for him given his state. Blood still trickled from his wound despite Lady Munda's best efforts to field dress the injury.
Lady Arya is under the assumption that the king has been brought to the wall against his will. I was raising her in the lift when I was attacked. I am unsure of what we are to find when the lift stops.
At these words, both the steel of houses Stark and Tarly were drawn from their sheaths. Jon struggled to remove ice from his side given his injury to his sword arm. After a few embarrassing moments, and some assistance, ice was now firmly gripped in his opposite hand. The rest of the voyage, the three men stood in silence. Once the lift stopped, Lord Tarly again operated the gate. Lord Eddard was the first to emerge from the lift and quickly scanned the area for threats. The smell of ash, smoke and charred flesh filled their noses and Eddard's shoulders slumped. Jon had noted his son's disappointment and directed his own attention in the same direction as Eddard. Lord Tarly would cover the Stark's blind side. Eddard knelt towards his aunt's body and attempted to fold her hands over her chest. It was then he noticed a significant portion of her sword arm was missing. Eddard rose to see the despair in the face of his father. For the first time in years, Eddard embraced him. Jon felt confused at the motion. It wasn't a father holding his son, but rather a son supporting his father. Eddard quickly repelled to give his father some space and stood sentry opposite Lord Tarly. The older boys, now men in their own right, had set security to allow the Lord Commander to mourn the loss of his family, his blood. Jon knelt and cradled the head of his father's daughter. His lungs were exhausted, though his mouth made no sound. It was grief beyond anything Jon could comprehend. He had suffered witnessing Rickon's death, Ygritte's death, and even his own death. Still, this was worse. Death had surrounded Jon's life no matter how he had lived. The stranger would always collect his toll, Jon cried to himself. He buried his arms under her body and attempted to lift her small frame, but the pain from his stab wouldn't allow him. Again, Jon struggled against his own pain tolerance before a hand was placed on his uninjured shoulder.
Father, you don't have to do everything yourself.
These words broke Jon as he finally felt it appropriate to wail like a small child. 2 or maybe 3 lungfuls and the emotion had left him completely. Now the determination had set in. Jon Tarly then reverently scooped Arya's body from the ground and carried her into the lift. Eddard reclaimed ice from the snow and then assisted his father to his feet. Jon could never remember ever having to lean on another man. He felt fortunate to have his own son be the first. Jon's eyes trailed off towards the funeral pyre that was the source of the smells atop the wall. Eddard then explained to him,
Its embers are still hot. A funeral pyre with a skeleton atop it, freshly put out.
Eddard explained as he held the ancient sword of House Stark in one hand and his father in another. The 3 men entered the lift and Lord Tarly again operated the gate. An enraged but calm Jon was considering a multitude of options, but the first would be what to do with the mutineer. Eddard assisted in keeping Sir Jon upright as his energy was nearly exhausted. The lift's familiar creaks Jon had allowed to echo in his ears, as this would likely be the last time he would ever keep watch over the wall.
Builder Rose will be sentenced to death.
A fitting reward for a craven, Lord Commander.
Agreed, Father.
Lord Eddard retorted. Jon had now noticed the blood spilling from Arya's neck had made the lift's floor slick with the crimson red.
I find myself unable to perform the execution myself, son. He will need to be placed under your judgment as Lord of Winterfell.
Jon could see the panic in Eddard's eyes. It was a tall task he was asking of him. Still, Eddard refused the inclination.
We have numerous men who can perform the execution, Father. He falls under your own judgment as Lord Commander of the Night's Watch.
His son pleaded. Jon knew his son had yet to have taken a life neither out of necessity nor duty. That would have to now change.
What is our way, son?
Our way is the old way.
Eddard exclaimed without hesitation. His eyes were glossy and his words fell to the ground as soon as he had uttered them. Jon slowly digested this before responding.
The man who passes the sentence shall swing the sword, and I find myself incapable at the moment.
Eddard chewed on his father's words. He thought Eddard would find any excuse to rid himself of this responsibility. Jon wanted him to pass this sentence, as it was clearly deserved.
Father, I cannot. This man has done me no wrong.
Justice should never be personal, Eddard. It is a duty that calls upon you this day. We must keep the old ways, son, lest they be forgotten.
Jon could see Eddard was searching for a retort when his voice seemed to act without his conscious thought. Jon then spoke the wise words once bestowed upon himself as a young lad.
Kill the boy, Eddard Stark.
Jon professed to his son, and a renewed vigor seemed to flow through Eddard at his father's challenge. His facial expression suggested both acknowledgement and inquiry. Jon then responded without provocation.
It's an old family saying.
Jon offered, thinking of his old wise relative Maester Aemon Targaryen. Eddard seemed to accept this responsibility without rebuttal as the lift hit the ground. The Blood Riders, now sworn to his son, remained mounted, and Lady Munda greeted them upon their arrival. She gasped at the look of Lady Arya's body and the blood-soaked lift they had emerged from. Jon Tully carried her body to the infirmary, followed closely by Eddard. Munda took Jon's weight into her arms as he delicately kissed her forehead. Her eyes communicated all Jon needed to hear at the moment. Jon then spoke delicately to her.
I need to send 2 letters, the first to King's Landing. We must inform the Hand. The king is dead, murdered atop the wall by an invading force.
Jon could barely believe the words coming from his own mouth. However, they paled in comparison to the answer to the following question his wife was likely to ask.
And what of the second letter, Jon?
Lady Munda inquired, clearly in shock at the revelation of the first letter. Jon noticed Ghost had appeared in the castle black courtyard, but he failed to locate Nymeria. Jon had assumed that somehow Nymeria had already known of what had occurred atop the wall moments before.
We must inform Eastwatch.
Of the death of the king?
Of course, but we'll need to add an additional piece of information.
And what would that be, my dearest husband?
She asked as Jon struggled against his own lightheadedness. He paused and looked deeply into his wife's eyes before admitting,
My watch has ended.